Hey everybody, welcome once again to the road to the ProcureTech Cup. Super happy to have you here. This is the show where we teach procurement professional the art of the possible with procurement technology. We've got a really cool show for you this week with Pactum coming on to discuss how to build the business case around specialized procurement tools, right? So the past couple of weeks, if I actually go to our housekeeping here, we've been discussing how to build business cases for sourcing tools, for source to pay suites, for intake and orchestration tools, SRM tools, which are distinct software categories within our space. But we also have these smaller tools that are more specialized in specific functions or sub-functions of the procurement process, right? And Pactum is one of those. So they have a pretty complex task this week, which is, they do something very specific, but I wanted them to help us understand how people should think about using specialized tools in general. So we'll try to cover both and give you some examples with Pactum. And of course, we continue on until the holiday break in December, and then in the new year all the way to April, where we have our ProcureTech Cup Finals virtual conference coming up as well. So we'll have more details for you in the new year as we approach that. So just a quick agenda before I bring our guest of honor. What is a specialized tool, right? So I just told you, but we'll get into the weeds on the definition here before going into the conversation. What is Pactum's? Who is Pactum? Who's their intro, right? As this solution category champ, who are they and what do they do for procurement? How do we build the business case for these types of tools, right? So the what, the numbers, and the who, which I think is also a dimension we haven't explored much so far. So we're going to be touching some new elements on how to build these business cases, and then we'll wrap up the show. So just before diving in here, let me bring in Dan from Pactum. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me, Joel. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I'm bringing you on a Friday night, so I appreciate you skipping the pub for this one.
Yeah, it's just on delay. My brother's already texted asking where I am. So yeah, but it's fun to be with you, I guess.
Well, it's a global show, right? So global audience, and I always appreciate it when folks from overseas tune in or log in, I should say, and tune in. So appreciate you being here. All right, so we covered the agenda. Let's get into just a little definition here, right? So specialized tools, usually I'll have the box around, the part of this procurement sub-processes that we're looking at this week. But as we said, right, specialized tools, I've seen specialized tools around, price management for, integrating with indexes where you have, rubber or raw materials that are in your products and you want to get updates, live updates from indexes into your back-end transactional systems. I've seen, things that are focused just on contract renewals. The blue square is the fact that a specialized solution can come and insert itself anywhere in the process. And then these yellow circles here, Dan, I think are more for what you guys do at Pactum, and I'd love it if you could give us a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were talking before, Joel, and you're right, specialized tools, and I've seen them in my background. I used to have a real job before I did this, and there are solutions for all kinds of problems, industry specific and otherwise. With us in Pactum, where we're coming in, is everything we do is around negotiation, and negotiations can happen in all kinds of places in the procurement process. So that's why the kind of gold boxes, when we were saying where to put them, I was kind of like pretty much everywhere, because these negotiations do happen everywhere along the process, and depending on the scenario and the supplier situation, these things can happen. And as you know, as we'll come on to, we have a very similar picture to the one you used to try and describe this. So yeah, I'll pull it up now for sure. So yeah, the across the kind of procurement flow, and I promise I didn't copy, but the process is kind of the same, right? But across that procurement flow, Pactum, we can help you negotiate regardless of how the opportunities arise. So whether it's at the kind of beginning of the flow, if you will, in data analytics, we've got solutions that can help you negotiate with lots of suppliers. If you identify a number of suppliers that you could put in place a better rebate structure or something. After sourcing events, great time to negotiate. You've got a number of suppliers and some competition, contracts and price lists. These things need renewing. Supplier management, if you're kind of onboarding new suppliers, or especially if you're trying to manage your suppliers and align their payment terms and other kind of header level terms. And then similarly, they're kind of requesting and ordering stage. There's again transactional negotiations that can happen. So anywhere in the process these things happen. So it's not as clean as just this one box. It's kind of we're sort of sprinkled throughout, if you will, trying to extract as much value as you can.
Yeah, because I feel like a negotiation, for supplier management, when you're onboarding the supplier, that may be your first contact with them. Whereas like they didn't go through sourcing or contracting, maybe they're too small a supplier for that, or, so it's very interesting the way you guys view the problem being sprinkled throughout the value chain of procurement, right? And I think you had like, the different products that you have are at the bottom here.
Yeah, but I appreciate they're quite small and not particularly descriptive. So we effectively have three primary solutions, which are campaigns, as you see on the left, price lists on the right, and what we call procurement in the middle. And each of these and everything we do within Pactum, all the negotiations, they all have their own strategy, their own tactics, their own input, their own output. And so we sort of have this array of solutions. And to quickly talk to each of them, campaigns is thinking supplier level terms. So this is the one in mind when you think about data analytics or supplier management. It's the kind of simple, I guess, the OG, if you will, of Pactum, which was kind of payment terms, negotiations, and early pay discounts. But that's now grown arms and legs and negotiates all manner of things, rebates and allowances and line haul rate reductions and many other things at a supplier level. I'll move to the right to price list, to the other kind of taller box, which is looking mainly at direct materials or complex indirect materials, things where you have a good structured data set behind it. You know what you've bought in the past, how many of them, what price you paid, maybe what value it comes with, and then we can bring in additional data to that to help identify opportunities and negotiate further.
And would that also work for like rate cards, right? And for professional services?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything where you've got some, like say, some level of structure where so rate cards is a good one. Catalogs as well as another one that people don't often think, and I don't sometimes remember to remind people about it. But yeah, where you've got that, like say, that structure of we've got a number of different things. We know what we're paying for them. We maybe have a rough idea of how much we've paid in the past. Maybe we can bring in some additional data around it to bring to life.
And then, I'm being the question hog, but for folks who are watching live, you can also ask questions in the chat, and I can ask Dan on your behalf. So make sure to do that if something comes up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. And then, so that's price list. I say quite sophisticated as a use case, uses a lot of data points, builds quite sophisticated arguments all autonomously. And then through the middle, the kind of three in the middle, we put under what we call procurement negotiations. This is the more transactional stuff. This is sourcing events, requisitions, and it ranges from the simple end with like single supplier requests, just kind of real one-off tail negotiations where a rec gets raised in a P2P solution and it's unnegotiated and we can grab that and do it, through taking sourcing events, whether that's ran on an e-sourcing platform, or whether it's coming from the world's most common sourcing platform, which is email and Excel. Like either of those inputs, we can bring that in and then use that competition again as a different negotiation strategy and lever to reach out to suppliers. And then the final one there is tactical sourcing, which sort of combines the two of those. We take requisitions, we can add more suppliers, we can use that competition. But with, as I say, with all of them, trying to effectively, what we're trying to do with all of this is extend the capability of the teams and the reach of what you're doing. And the how is what you've just jumped on. So that's basically for all of these, as I say, regardless of the inputs, what we're looking to do with Pactum is analyze, or automatically Pactum analyzes the inputs that it's got, whether that be a requisition or a sourcing event, any other supporting data, uses it to identify the particular opportunity and scenario. Then from that develops the right strategy. How should we negotiate? What sequence should we do it in? Executes it live with the supplier through a chat that's interactive for the supplier, that's real time, and then on conclusion updates back to wherever makes sense, whether that's the user or an alternative procurement system that it's come out of.
And I love the way you've conceptualized, right, where you can see this plugging into those different touch points in the value chain as we outlined earlier, right? So this is great. And I know, like, I see the time moving here, so we're going to get to the discussion on the value levers. But before we do, I know folks are always interested in a demo. We did a lot of them last year on the show. This year, we're more focusing on how to make you successful, right? How to build a business case, for example. But if you do want to see a demo of Pactum, there is one on their site that's a Pactum Demo in 90 seconds. So you can scan this QR code, scroll down a little bit on the page, and you'll see what it's all about in action, right? The theory we've just discussed. So that being said, how do you build the business case for specialized tools, right? And I think based on what you've just showed us of what you guys do as Pactum, you're in a great spot to discuss it. So I'd let you start us off, Dan.
Thank you, mate. And I appreciate you letting me go slightly off piste with this as well, because I think the key thing with the business case is it's not just the business case, it's how you get approval for that business case. The numbers could stack up, but ultimately the business case is there to try and get approval. And so when I was thinking about how best to conceptualize this, I thought about Dragon's Den, but then I thought that's very UK specific. So then I thought, well, the folks across the pond know Shark Tank better. So I framed it and I've tried to think about or tried to frame this around thinking like a shark to get approval. There's a structure to really good Shark Tank pitches, Dragon's Den pitches, and that's what I tried to follow.
And I would say that in Canada it's also called Dragon's Den. So you got.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. That's you guys stuck to the real title. That's good. I like it. But the challenge, I guess, the ultimate challenge though, with specialist tech, if you will, with things people aren't familiar with, is it's often hard for leadership to kind of understand the problem that's being solved. And often the kind of bad practice, the disconnect, is people will come and use technical jargon and not talk about the thing that they're trying to get to. So they'll talk about the cool things this solution does or this tech does. And our analogy there is like our most successful customers don't pitch AI negotiations. That's not what you're not here to buy AI negotiation tech. You're here to get the outcome, which is, as it says there, a new way to autonomously capture 2 to 5% in value in unmanaged supplier deals. The framing is the exact same thing. It's just framing it in a different way around the outcome. And to get to that, I think there's sort of three key tenets, if you will. If you want to flick to the next slide, Joel, I think you spoke about them in your agenda. But if you think about the investor's mindset and how you get around that challenge, there's 3 things that you need to be able to explain quite articulately. The first is what's the problem that you're solving? How are you doing that? The second is the numbers. As much as I say it's not just the business case, you have to have your numbers stacked up. We've all seen the Dragon's Den or the Shark Tank episodes, right? Where yeah, exactly. They just crumble when they're asked about profit numbers or something. It's like, have you never watched this show before? So that's also still key. And then, as you mentioned, I also think the who is really important. I think, we'll get onto the detail of it, but how are you going to deliver it? Who's going to deliver it? Who is it that the leadership have to trust with this is key to building confidence.
And do you feel there's a different dynamic especially for the what, but even the numbers in a place where, they don't have much ProcureTech, right? They don't have a source to pay suite or a platform or what have you, right? Versus a place where they might already have some. Like I'm almost thinking, at least from personal experience, it might be harder to make that case of the what when you already have a tool set, because, well, why can't you just use what you already have, right?
I think I agree with you 80%, but because if you've got tools already, exactly, then people might wonder, well, have you not got something that can do it already? If you've got a track record of delivering the value with the tools that you've got, then you might be able to quite easily position another thing to kind of extend further. So there is a dependency on how well you've done with the prior ProcureTech solutions, I think, a little bit. And then similarly on the other side, it's possibly easier because there's a bit more fertile ground, right? You've not got all these benefits and tools, so getting another tool is good. At the same time, if it's the first time that you're getting leadership buy-in to procurement tools, then it's probably the first time is probably the most difficult, because they're like, well, what is this not going to cause us more problems? So
yeah, no, fair enough. And I think it to foreshadow a little bit, it depends on how the story, where you are in the story, right? With your company and with your executives and your procurement transformation journey.
Exactly. And that brings us on to the first part, I think, the mention of the story for sure. But that's the what. So the first thing is what you're solving. And I've actually, you told me about this concept of bad idea, good idea when we're making these, when we spoke earlier in the week, and I got lost in some cartoons online that are worth watching. if you want to see them. But bad idea, right, is when thinking about the what, thinking about the kind of problem and the solution that you're solving. Bad idea is we found this AI tool that we need to buy. Like, that's not a good story. That's a I want something, please. You've not even said please in my example there. Good idea. Frame the problem first. We're leaking 2 million a quarter in indirect due to manual slow processes. Frame where you are and the pain and what exists today. And the sort of three things along the bottom are kind of the way I think about it is what's the story that you're taking the customer on? The kind of, it's not quite hero's journey, but similar to that. Like, you quantify the pain, state what the business is losing at the minute, what the struggle is, the suffering of the end users, whatever that might be. Then simply introduce the solution, not too techy again, but a specialist tool that can autonomously negotiate would be the way you frame Pactum. It scales to do supplier deals, not technical jargon about Gen AI and machine learning and agents and other things. Keep it simple, and then articulate the difference, the before, the solution, the after, and like I say, the 10x difference being the money and the numbers. But it's that kind of that journey. And I know you mentioned before about stories and stuff, but
yeah, and I think this applies to any other, like I'm thinking of another specialist tool, right, that I know of, where you're putting prices up to date for SKUs where there's a pricing formula tied to indexes of raw materials, right? If you're doing that manually, then there's a whole lot of pain, right? And we've said this on the show a couple of times in the past business case shows, like pain sells a lot more than potential benefit. So it's like framing it as pain. And then, it's being able to automate that, or to do that autonomously, or, seamlessly, so that you can get, and build. And also, there's potential benefit or potential activities you can get to that you're not getting to today that might be more important to that stakeholder as well, right? So yeah, and to go on the storytelling part, right? That's an angle that you suggested that I thought was really interesting, because we haven't explored it too much this season in the show, and it's really about telling a story, right? And I've heard the story we see on screen, right, where there's the beginning and the end, which is your x-axis, and then what is the positive value, what's good that's happening to you, and what's bad that's happening to you as a character in that story, or you're for the characters in that story. And if your story looks like this, or this is how your CXO or your stakeholders are interpreting your story, you've lost them. This is not a good story, right? It's too complex. There's too many winding roads. And so I would push you to get inspired by the main story, 6 main storytelling arcs, right? So in writing and in storytelling, you're always kind of tacking on your story to one of these arcs where, and all of these from movies, from books that you watch, right? So why reinvent the wheel when you're thinking about how you're going to pitch your business case or your specialized tool or any other tool, right? Think about the top 3 ones, because the bottom ones, like, they're tragic stories, right? But you want to finish with a benefit. You want to finish better off than where you started, right? So the man in a hole, everything was good. It didn't, we got hit by something like the T word, tariffs, right? And so we need to come out of that hole, and here's how we do that. Rags to riches, which you referenced in your previous slide, and then even Cinderella story, right? So thinking about, where are you in the story when you're trying to pitch this? Are you really at the start? Are you in the middle? And how are you building it so that you're really painting that picture? So when we discussed that, this immediately came to mind. I'm going, this is actually a good concept that we should cover.
No, I agree, and I think what I would say as well, just to pick up a point that you mentioned that resonated well, you're not always at the beginning of the story. Your story may, and to come back to what you said earlier about having other ProcureTech, like it may be that the Cinderella story, for example, we were here, everything was going well, and then something changed in the business. We acquired another company, something else changed, and then we dropped back down to the kind of trough again, and now we need Pactum, hopefully, to come and save the day, sort of thing, and drag us back up. So you're not always at the start. You don't have to tell the whole story. You might be 3/4 of the way through before you pick up.
Yeah, and Jackson in the chat made a good point as well, which says I would assume the messaging also has to be adapted based on who is being sold to outside of procurement. Example, CTO, etc. Right? So very important as well. And I'm sure you have some anecdotes on that.
Oh no, absolutely. And hey, Jackson, I know Jackson from old, so always nice. But yeah, no, it does. It makes a lot of difference. I previously, I say when I used to have a proper job, I one of the things we had to do when we were asking for certain procurement technology was go and pitch to the capital advisory board, and the leader on that was the chief engineer. I used to work at an aerospace company. It's a very different story when you're telling an engineer that you need more procurement software as opposed to putting some money into some far end technology investment that may never pay off. And so you need to appreciate the story you're telling and how it's going to help them in the future. So you're absolutely right, Jackson. It really does matter knowing who your audience is. But I think to that point, regardless of the audience, one thing, as we joked at the beginning, like you do need to master the numbers. So the second part of the kind of story is the detail of the business case. For me, there's three main parts of that. What is it you're asking for? Like, what's the money? Make it clear. Like, again, Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, they're very clear up front. Like, this is what we need. What's the success? What is the thing that you're going to improve? And ultimately, what's the payoff and what's the money on the other side? And my experience generally is that 1 and 3 people are pretty good at, like, not always great at telling the story with numbers, which I'll talk about in a moment, but like, people know here's what the cost is and here's what the payoff will be. They know they've got to get an ROI number in there, make it clear, make it big enough. But the middle one is where people, I think, sometimes forget to kind of focus and actually figure out what is the success metric. How are you going to measure that this is improved? How, like, if it's money, if it's just pure monetary benefit, how are you actually going to measure that money's coming in and hitting the bottom line? And I also think there's a challenge sometimes with people trusting, maybe is the wrong word, but work with your partners is my point. That's what I'm going to try and say. Like the success metric part, it's in everybody's benefit that you hit it. So work with the partners, with the tech partners, with consulting partners, whatever it might be, to make sure you're all aligned on those metrics.
And I feel like in specialized solutions, especially, like, they're usually more dialed into what those success metrics are, because they're focusing on a very narrow, value proposition, right? That may be very powerful, but still very narrow in terms of scope. And so, I would expect, and I hope I'm not putting you in a hot seat, right? But like, the specialized solution providers to be able to kind of have those success metrics already at the table when they're helping you build a business case, right? If it's their value advisory team, for example, and then also have it built into the tool so that you can actually measure them automatically instead of having to export data and slice and dice Excel files, right?
I couldn't agree more. Like, I mean, from a Pactum point of view, we make sure those numbers are literally, like, we call them hero numbers, at the top of the dashboard. Like, what are the things that we believe are most important, and let's bring them out. For us, one of the obvious easier ones is cost, but because we're negotiating deals, but it might not be that. It might be turnaround times, it might be success rates, it might be right first time, whatever it is. Like, make sure that's clear. I think the other part of telling that as well, and to come back to kind of the numbers thing, and the next slide, like, what I think is also important is with specialist providers, especially, is sometimes where it's not as obvious where we fit. So you need to be able to visualize and tell a story with the numbers. So think about how you're bringing to life the scope that you're gonna fit. So this is just a kind of anonymized example that we use with Pactum, but we're always trying to show, okay, how do we go from where you are today to where Pactum will align up? And off the back end of this, we have benefits cases for each of the use cases we've described earlier. But sort of think about how you're visualizing those numbers, because again, some of the bad practice I have seen in the past is just present an Excel sheet. It's kind of, I don't get where your numbers are coming from. I can't work them back. So if there's kind of a 2 or 3 slide flow to this, but my point is more, numbers can be quite visual if you make them that way.
I love this slide. This is great. I might have to steal this in other contexts. This is a great format.
No worries. So long as I get credit, that's cool.
Yes, absolutely. This is great.
And then, so the last point, and actually I think the most forgotten point, most definitely in this scenario, is the who, right? The Shark Tank thing that you always hear them after the presentations, or what is it you liked about the investment, and it's kind of, oh, well, actually I invested in the team, I invested in the people. And it's the exact same. Like senior leadership folks are investing in the team as much as anything. Do they trust you? So bring forward who the team is, highlight where you've got supportive people, or you've got people on the team that have had success in the past, that have good reputations. That is going to be valuable because people trust the money more so. The second part of that then is they're also addressing the fear. Like also be a way to build trust and build trust in the who is appreciate that you've addressed the fear. That the ultimate fear is, okay, what if it fails? And so be clear about that. Understand it's an isolated scope, it's quantifiable risk. There's a clear exit strategy. Know what those things are. Align on them with your partner. Like make sure that you're talking to them about it, because it's, again, in both of your interests to avoid that problem, but you need to know what that kind of scope and things are. And then the last one is, once you've got your team and you've aligned on that fear, then link the whole thing back to something that's important. It's sort of the old kind of salesperson's trick, if I'm honest. Like look at the annual report and see what are the big strategic themes, and link it back to that, or something else in your business plan deployment, or whatever it is in the organization. But show how this is helping your leadership achieve their goals, and that's going to give them way more.
Oh yeah, no, I love you pointing that out, because it's a quick win, like super easy hack, right? Like go read your latest financial reports or strategy documents. Like you may be able to, have an upper hand on the sales teams, in the sense where you can peel the onion back one layer more and go and get on your intranet, like search for strategy documents, and you might get a hit, right? So definitely aligning it with company strategy is how, because they're talking about that in those executive meetings, right? And so it's how you make your pain or your operationalization operations improvement projects like tie back into the wider company strategy, right? So as you go up in the hierarchy of your business, that becomes more and more important for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then my one last thing to kind of wrap up, because I appreciate where we're getting to on the time with this as well, is again, it's, I don't know, is it another salesperson's trick? Maybe, but not a trick so much, but it's important. Have your 30-second exec summary, your elevator pitch, if you will, like in place to get people to get your execs on board. You'll have more time in these sessions when you're presenting the numbers, but you've got to get to those sessions as well. So when you're leading up to that and you've got the opportunity, make sure you're clear on, like, what is your elevator pitch? What's the problem? What's the solution? What are you asking for? 30 seconds when it's like the boss is getting the coffee in the morning and you bump into them in the kitchen because you've been watching them for the last hour, waiting for them to go in, and you've got that 30 seconds. Like take advantage of it. Have your pitch nailed, because again, at the end of the day, it's they need to believe in it. They need to understand it. And if they've seen it before, they're aware of it. They know the solution that's being solved for. When the big presentation comes around, they're already 80% of the way there, hopefully.
Yeah, and I love that you've given the watchers, the viewers, templates, right, to draft off of. And I've always said this, less so recently, right? But that if you're in procurement, you're in sales to some extent, right? And so this is exactly the illustration of that, right? And working through your stories, working through your pitch, working through the value, and making sure that you don't fall into the trap of, like, we go to school and university and all this stuff and everything gets complex, more and more complex every year. Then you go out into the business world and it should be like, what's your 3 points, right? What's the message, right? Because you're going to lose folks in the complexity.
Absolutely.
And so just as a recap here, right, we talked about, Dan talked about mostly, right, the what, the numbers, and the who, right? So what, quantifying the pain sells more than benefit does. Simplifying the solution and articulating where you're going in that story arc, and using those story arcs purposefully, right? When you're thinking about how you're going to pitch a certain project and where you are in that story, right? You might already be in a story that you're trying to change the arc of. The numbers, right? So yes, investments, yes, returns, which are the two defaults. But what are the metrics that we're tying to be able to say that we're on the right track? And how are we with our potential vendor baking that into the solution? And then the who, right? Who is as important as the what and the numbers, right? What are the dynamics from a reputational standpoint in your business? What's your reputation or your brand? Like, can you leverage it, or do you need support and go get somebody else's support to help leverage their brand within the business to get something across the line and executed? and then be prepared with your elevator pitch or your executive summary, right? So I think that's kind of the big picture of what we discussed today. And then as we wrap up here, first off, a big thank you to Dan for coming on the show and giving us this framework that's not only applicable for Pactum, but for any other specialized solution you'd look at, and being very thoughtful about watching previous episodes and trying to bring something different to the conversation. So a big thank you. If you watching the show want to keep going with us on this journey on the road to the ProcureTech Cup, you can scan the QR code on the left-hand side. Make sure you're reading the Pure Procurement newsletter, which is where I send all the invites every week, but also we share jobs, links that you should read to stay in touch. So I try to make it the one resource that is worth reading in ProcureTech. And then Dan, I know you guys prepared something special for the viewers as well, right?
Yeah, so on the right hand side here, it's actually something written by Casper, who's one of our co-founders and our chief exec. With things like, well, with Pactum specifically, obviously there's people often ask, how do you get started? How do we do something with Pactum? And there's levels to what we call AI negotiation intelligence. And so Casper wrote quite a thoughtful article about that, which I thought would be a great kind of asset if people want to read a little bit more, understand a bit more about how deeply we think about what we're talking about here as Pactum. And then from there you can reach out and have another chat with us if you want to as well.
Beautiful. So a big thank you again, Dan. Thank you to everybody who took their time to watch the show, and your Friday night, and everybody who's spending their Friday night with us. So I appreciate it. We'll see you again next week when we're talking about Spend HQ and spend analysis. So really excited. See you again next week.